She made a young housekeeper sob on her knees for 6 hours, scrubbing the same marble floor over and over. And she smiled while doing it. For 3 years, this Korean mafia boss's wife terrorized everyone in their Chicago penthouse. Nobody dared to challenge her. Nobody even tried, until the day a broke former HR investigator with nothing left to lose discovered her darkest secret. This is the story of how one woman brought down a tyrant. Not with violence or money, but with a single word. And I promise you, by the end of this story, you'll never look at powerful people the same way again. This is a story about justice. No, it's about something far more powerful than that. Stay with me. Let me tell you a story about fear, lies, and what happens when someone finally refuses to be afraid. Welcome to Soul Woven Stories. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your thoughts on the story and where you are watching from. On the 42nd floor of Chicago's most exclusive building, there was a penthouse that cost more than most people would earn in a lifetime. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city like a kingdom. Marble imported from Italy. Crystal chandeliers that caught the light like captured stars. Even the silence felt expensive. And in this world of luxury and whispered terror, there was one name that made everyone freeze. Victoria Sterling. She was the wife of Dae Young Choi, a Korean mafia boss whose name alone could make Chicago's underworld go silent. His power commanded respect through calculated force. But Victoria, she built something different. She built an empire of sadistic cruelty. The household staff would literally tremble when she entered a room. They'd seen what she could do. There was Maria, a 19-year-old housekeeper saving money to bring her family from Mexico, forced to scrub the same section of marble floor for 6 hours over an imaginary smudge. Victoria didn't just torture her. She sat on the white sofa with champagne, periodically dropping ice cubes on the floor and demanding they be cleaned immediately. And according to those who were there, she smiled while Maria sobbed with raw, bleeding knees. That's the kind of person Victoria Sterling was. Now, into this world walked a woman named Keisha Robinson. Keisha was 28 years old, and 3 months ago, her life had fallen apart. She'd been working as an HR investigator for one of Chicago's top corporations. She loved that job. She was brilliant at it, too, uncovering workplace harassment that others missed, connecting patterns of discrimination that seemed invisible to everyone else. But then the company downsized her entire department. Budget restructuring, they said. And just like that, her career was gone. So there she was, adjusting the stiff collar of a maid's uniform, trying to remember which cleaning solution went on which surface, feeling like she'd fallen from a high-rise office and landed in a completely different universe. What Victoria Sterling didn't know, what no one knew, was that the woman now folding her silk blouses and organizing her designer shoes had spent years investigating people's secrets for a living. Keisha's entire career had been built on one skill, finding the truth that people desperately wanted to hide. And when she witnessed Victoria's cruelty firsthand, when she saw that sadistic smile as Maria scrubbed and sobbed, something awakened in Keisha. That old, familiar fire. The same burning sense of justice that had driven every workplace investigation she'd ever conducted. Someone needed to stop this woman. And since everyone else was too terrified to try, it would have to be her. Victoria Sterling thought she was untouchable. Protected by her husband's fearsome reputation, insulated by her carefully constructed identity as Boston aristocracy, secure in the knowledge that no one would ever dare to question her. But she made one critical mistake. She underestimated the broke maid with the sharp eyes and the investigator's instincts. Because while Victoria was busy terrorizing the household staff, Keisha was quietly doing what she did best, digging into the past, following the threads, uncovering the truth. And what she found would shatter Victoria's entire world. This is the story of how Keisha Robinson discovered that Victoria Sterling, the woman who claimed descent from Boston Brahmin aristocracy, who lorded her supposed pedigree over everyone she met, was actually Vicky Kowalski. A steel worker's daughter from Pittsburgh. A failed beauty pageant contestant. A woman who'd been arrested for writing bad checks. A complete and total fraud. And it's the story of what happened when Keisha spoke that single word, Kowalski, in a penthouse study while a dangerous mafia boss listened from the shadows. Because sometimes, the most powerful weapon isn't a gun or money or connections. Sometimes, it's just the truth. And in the hands of someone brave enough to speak it, One word can bring down an empire built on lies. The service elevator smelled like lemon polish and fear. Rosa Martinez stood close to Keisha, her voice barely above a whisper even though they were alone, descending from the 42nd floor after Keisha's orientation. "Listen to me carefully," Rosa said, her accent thick with urgency. "Mrs. Sterling, she has a pattern. First, she watches you. Studies you like you're an insect under glass. Then she finds your weak spot, what you care about, what you need, what scares you. And then she breaks you. Slowly. Deliberately." Keisha nodded, gripping her supply cart tighter. She'd faced difficult people before in her HR days, but something in Rosa's eyes suggested this was different. "There was a chef," Rosa continued, glancing at the elevator numbers like they might be listening. "Jean-Paul. Trained in Paris, worked in Michelin star restaurants. Mrs. Sterling claimed she found a hair in her consommé. Had him fired on the spot, then called every high-end restaurant in Chicago. He's washing dishes in Naperville now." Rosa's voice dropped even lower. "But Maria, one of the junior housekeepers? She saw Mrs. Sterling pull out her own hair and drop it in the soup before she called Jean-Paul to her table. She smiled while she did it." The elevator doors opened to reveal a pristine hallway. Rosa straightened immediately, her fear transforming into professional composure like a mask snapping into place. The staff meeting happened at precisely 2 o'clock in the main living room. Keisha stood in line with 5 other household employees, feeling absurdly like a soldier awaiting inspection. Which, as it turned out, wasn't far from the truth. Victoria Sterling entered wearing a white suit that probably cost more than Keisha's entire year of college tuition. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, emphasizing cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. But it was her eyes that made Keisha's breath catch, ice blue, calculating, scanning each person with the clinical precision of someone cataloging weaknesses for future exploitation. Victoria walked down the line slowly, pausing before each person. When she reached Keisha, those cold eyes narrowed slightly. "You're new," Victoria said. "Not a question. An accusation." "Yes, ma'am. Keisha Robinson." "We'll see how long you last, Miss Robinson." Victoria's smile was thin, reptilian. "I have very high standards." Then Dae-Young Choi appeared in the doorway, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He was younger than Keisha expected, maybe 40, wearing a perfectly tailored dark suit. His presence was different from Victoria's theatrical cruelty, quieter, denser, like gravity itself had intensified. He didn't need to perform power. He simply was power. But what struck Keisha most was the way he looked at his wife. Not with love or fear or even anger. It was something closer to weary disappointment, like watching something beautiful rot from the inside out. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, Keisha saw something she recognized from 100 workplace investigations, a man who'd made a terrible mistake and was now calculating the cost of correcting it. He nodded once to the assembled staff and disappeared back into his office, leaving Victoria to her inspection. But Keisha couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just witnessed something important. Something that suggested the power dynamics in this penthouse were far more complicated than they appeared. Victoria dismissed them with a wave, and as Keisha followed Rosa back toward the service areas, she made a mental note: the wife might be the immediate threat, but the husband was the real power. And he was watching everything with those careful, calculating eyes. The game was more complex than she thought. And Keisha had always been good at complex games. It happened on Keisha's 3rd day, in the main foyer where afternoon sunlight turned the Italian marble into something that looked like liquid gold. Keisha was organizing the linen closet nearby when she heard it, a sound that made her entire body go rigid. Someone crying. Not just crying. Sobbing with the kind of desperate, hiccuping gasps that came from a soul being systematically broken. She stepped into the foyer and froze. Maria was on her hands and knees, scrubbing the same 2-foot section of marble floor with movements that had gone from frantic to mechanical to defeated. Her uniform was soaked with sweat and cleaning solution. Her knees, visible beneath her pushed-up skirt, were an angry red that was starting to bleed through the skin. Her hands trembled as she worked the brush in circles, over and over and over the same spot. And there, on the white velvet sofa positioned exactly 10 feet away, sat Victoria Sterling. She wore a pale blue dress and held a champagne flute like a scepter. Her posture was relaxed, almost lazy, like she was watching a mildly entertaining television program rather than a 19-year-old girl's psychological destruction. "I still see the smudge, Maria," Victoria said, her voice carrying the bored tone of someone commenting on weather. She lifted an ice cube from her glass and dropped it deliberately onto the floor 3 feet from where Maria was working. "And now there's water. Clean it. Immediately." Maria's sob caught in her throat. She crawled toward the ice cube, her movements slow and painful, and began wiping at the water with her already soaked cloth. Keisha felt it then, that old, familiar burning in her chest. The same fire that had ignited every time she'd uncovered workplace harassment in her HR days. Every time she'd found evidence of systematic abuse disguised as management. Every time someone with power had weaponized that power against someone defenseless. This wasn't about cleanliness. This wasn't even about control, not really. This was about something darker. This was cruelty as performance art. Sadism as sport. "Mrs. Sterling," Keisha heard herself say, stepping into the foyer before her brain could stop her mouth. "I can take over for Maria. She looks unwell." Victoria's head turned slowly, those ice blue eyes landing on Keisha with the weight of a predator noticing unexpected movement. For a moment, something flickered across her face, surprise, maybe, or irritation that her entertainment was being interrupted. Then she smiled. Small. Satisfied. Like she'd just discovered a new toy. "How thoughtful of you, Miss Robinson. But Maria will finish what she started. Won't you, Maria?" Victoria took a delicate sip of champagne, and Keisha saw it clearly, the way Victoria watched Maria's shoulders shake with fresh sobs, the way her eyes tracked every tear, every tremor, every sign of breaking. She was feeding on this. Drawing sustenance from another person's suffering. And that's when Keisha knew. She'd seen this before in her investigations, though never quite this extreme. People who inflicted cruelty with this much calculation, this much pleasure, this much systematic precision, they were always running from something. Always hiding something. The cruelest people built their power on the shakiest foundations because deep down, they were terrified of being exposed as exactly what they'd once been, powerless. Victoria Sterling had a crack in her armor. Keisha couldn't see it yet, couldn't identify its exact shape or location. But it was there. It had to be. Because nobody became this kind of monster unless they were desperately afraid of something. And Keisha had spent years learning how to find the things people were afraid of. Maria finally collapsed, her arms giving out. Rosa appeared from nowhere and helped the girl up, shooting Keisha a warning look that said clearly, "Don't make yourself a target." But it was too late for that. Victoria was already watching Keisha with those calculating eyes, already adding her to whatever twisted list she kept of people who needed to be broken. The game had begun. The summons came the next morning through Rosa, whose expression looked like she was delivering a terminal diagnosis. "Mrs. Sterling wants you as her personal maid. Starting immediately." Rosa gripped Keisha's arm. The last girl, Christine, she lasted 2 weeks before she had a panic attack in the supply closet. Couldn't stop shaking. Had to be taken out in an ambulance. Keisha nodded slowly, that investigator's brain already cataloging information, preparing for battle. Victoria's dressing room was larger than Keisha's entire studio apartment. Wall-to-wall mirrors, custom lighting, racks of designer clothes organized with museum-level precision. Victoria stood at the center like a general in her war room. "My tea," she began without preamble, "must be exactly 162 degrees. Not 160. Not 165. Exactly 162. I can taste the difference." Keisha doubted that but said nothing. "My clothes are arranged by color, then by fabric weight within each color category. Silk before cotton. Cotton before wool. Any deviation and you'll start over." Victoria's smile was sharp. "I have very particular standards, Miss Robinson. Most people can't meet them." The impossible demands came in waves over the next week. Tea that was always wrong, too hot, too cold, the wrong color despite using the identical tea bag. Pillows positioned at angles that apparently only Victoria's eyes could detect. Accusations that Keisha had moved things in ways that were completely invisible to any rational person. Keisha documented everything. Old HR habit. Timestamps, photos, notes. If someone was building a case for your failure, you built a better case for their patterns of harassment. The design to fail moment came on Friday morning. Keisha was hanging freshly steamed blouses when Victoria swept into the dressing room, her face already arranged in an expression of theatrical outrage. What is this? Victoria snatched a white silk blouse from the rack, holding it up to the light. A small yellowish stain marked the collar. You've ruined it. This is a $3,000 Valentino, and you've stained it. The accusation hung in the air. This was the moment. The moment where Keisha was supposed to panic, apologize, maybe cry. The moment where Victoria would watch her crumble and feel that familiar satisfaction of breaking another one. Instead, Keisha pulled out her phone. That stain was already there, Mrs. Sterling. Her voice was calm, professional, the same tone she'd used delivering findings in hostile HR investigations. I photographed all garments before handling them. Standard practice to protect both the employee and employer. She turned the phone screen toward Victoria. There it was, the white Valentino blouse, timestamp from 3 days ago, the yellowish stain clearly visible on the collar. Victoria's face went through a rapid sequence of expressions. Surprise first, genuine, unguarded surprise that someone had anticipated her game. Then irritation, sharp and hot, that her trap had failed. Then something else, something harder to read. Recalculation, maybe. A predator realizing its prey had teeth. I see, Victoria said slowly, her voice losing some of its theatrical quality and gaining something more dangerous. Real anger, not performed outrage. How thorough of you. I learned to be thorough in my previous career, Keisha said evenly. It's just habit now. For several long seconds, they stared at each other. Keisha kept her expression neutral, professional, unintimidated. She'd faced down executives who'd sexually harassed entire departments, managers who'd systematically discriminated against protected classes. She wasn't about to be rattled by a bully in designer clothes, no matter whose wife she was. Victoria set down the blouse with deliberate care. You may go, Miss Robinson. I'll call if I need you. It was a dismissal, but it was also something else. A recognition. For the first time in 3 years, someone in this penthouse hadn't immediately crumbled under Victoria Sterling's pressure. And as Keisha left the dressing room, she caught a glimpse of Victoria's reflection in one of the many mirrors. The mask had slipped slightly. Beneath the cultivated aristocratic disdain was something rawer. Something that looked almost like fear. The crack in the armor was getting wider. Keisha just needed to find out what it was hiding. Keisha was replacing light bulbs in the hallway sconces when she heard footsteps behind her, the kind of quiet, controlled footsteps that made the air feel heavier. She turned to find Dae-Young Choi standing less than 6 feet away, hands in his pockets, watching her with those dark, unreadable eyes. Her heart kicked against her ribs. In 2 weeks of working here, he'd never directly addressed her. Never directly addressed any of the staff, as far as she'd seen. He existed in a different orbit, moving through the penthouse like a shadow that happened to own everything the light touched. Miss Robinson. His voice was quiet, accented but precise. May I speak with you for a moment? Of course, Mr. Choi. Keisha climbed down from the stepladder, acutely aware of her rumpled uniform and the fact that she was holding a light bulb. He studied her for a moment, and she had the unsettling sensation of being assessed by someone who'd built an empire on reading people accurately. I want to apologize for my wife's behavior. What happened with the blouse this morning? I'm aware of these incidents. Keisha said nothing, just waited. Years of conducting investigations had taught her that silence often extracted more truth than questions. My wife carries heavy things from her past, Dae-Young continued, and something flickered across his face. Sadness, maybe. Or disappointment so deep it had calcified into something harder. It makes her cruel. Not an excuse, just an explanation. With respect, Mr. Choi, people carry heavy things from their past all the time. It doesn't give them permission to torture 19-year-old girls for 6 hours. The words were out before Keisha could stop them, and for a moment she wondered if she'd just talked herself into an early grave. But Dae-Young's expression softened slightly, something that might have been approval crossing his features. No. It doesn't. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, pressing it into her hands. You handled yourself with dignity today. That's rare here. Rare anywhere, actually. The envelope was thick. Keisha could feel the weight of cash inside, far more than any reasonable tip. I don't tolerate cruelty in my business dealings, Miss Robinson. I'm precise, sometimes harsh, but never gratuitously cruel. My wife. He trailed off, shaking his head. She's different. And I'm trying to understand why. He walked away before Keisha could respond, disappearing into his office with that same quiet, controlled grace. She stood in the hallway holding the envelope and a light bulb, her mind racing. My wife carries heavy things from her past. The words echoed in her head as she returned to her quarters that night. Keisha sat on her narrow bed and thought about her mentor from her HR days, Patricia Chen, a woman who taught her everything about workplace investigations. Patricia had a saying she repeated like a mantra: the cruelest people are often living in the most fragile houses. Their aggression isn't strength. It's architecture. They're building walls around their weakest point, and the more vicious the defense, the more vulnerable the thing they're protecting. Victoria Sterling's cruelty wasn't random. It was systematic, calculated, performed. She didn't just hurt people, she selected them carefully, broke them methodically, watched their destruction with that satisfied smile. That level of sadism wasn't about power. It was about fear. What was Victoria so afraid of? Keisha opened her laptop, the investigator's instinct fully awakened now. She typed Victoria Sterling into the search bar and hit enter. It was time to find out what heavy things Victoria was carrying. And more importantly, why those heavy things made her into a monster who needed to be stopped. Keisha found Rosa in the service kitchen during the afternoon break, folding linens with the mechanical precision of someone whose hands knew the work but whose mind was elsewhere. How long has Mrs. Sterling been married to Mr. Choi? Keisha asked, keeping her voice casual as she poured coffee. Rosa's hands paused mid-fold. 3 years. Maybe a little more. Why? Just curious. She ever talk about her life before Chicago? Family, old friends, where she grew up? Never. Rosa set down the linen, her eyes narrowing with understanding. You're digging, aren't you? Like you used to do in your old job. Keisha didn't deny it. Rosa glanced toward the door, then lowered her voice. She appeared out of nowhere. One day there's an engagement announcement in all the magazines. Dae-young Choi marrying some Boston socialite nobody had ever heard of. The wedding was small, private. No family on her side, she said they were all dead. No childhood friends, no college roommates, nobody from her past. It's like she didn't exist before she became Mrs. Choi. That's not unusual for someone trying to escape a difficult past, Keisha said, playing devil's advocate. Maybe. Rosa picked up another linen. But it's like she's a woman with no past at all. No stories, no memories, no slip-ups. Everything about her is too rehearsed. You know? That night, Keisha sat cross-legged on her bed with her laptop, diving into the kind of research that had once been her profession. She started with the basics, Victoria Sterling, in public records databases. Almost nothing. A few society page mentions from the past 3 years, charity galas, restaurant openings, always on Dae-young's arm, always described with words like elegant and refined. But before that? A digital ghost. No college records. No previous addresses. No social media presence predating her engagement. No trail of the 1,000 small digital breadcrumbs that everyone left in the modern world. She found the engagement announcement in Town and Country's online archives, dated 3 years and 2 months ago. The photo showed a younger Victoria, already polished but somehow less finished. The caption read, Technology magnate Dae-young Choi announces his engagement to Boston socialite Victoria Sterling, daughter of the late Reginald Sterling. Keisha clicked through to a deeper search on Reginald Sterling. Dozens of results. Reginald Sterling, the dentist in Tampa. Reginald Sterling, the retired accountant in Phoenix. Reginald Sterling, who died in 2008 in Oklahoma. None connected to Boston society. None with daughters the right age. none matching the patrician lineage Victoria claimed. She cross-referenced Boston social registers, alumni databases from the expected schools, Wellesley, Smith, Radcliffe. Nothing. No Victoria Sterling. No Sterling family in the social register that matched the timeline. It was too neat. Too polished. Too perfect. Keisha had seen this before, not often, but enough to recognize the pattern. People who reinvented themselves completely, who built new identities from carefully selected pieces of other people's lives. The con artists who chose common names that were impossible to trace. The fraudsters who claimed dead parents who couldn't contradict their stories. Victoria Sterling's past wasn't missing. It was constructed. And somewhere in the real past, the one Victoria had buried under layers of lies and carefully maintained performances, was the truth. The thing she was so desperately afraid of. The weakness that made her lash out with such calculated cruelty at anyone who might, consciously or unconsciously, remind her of who she'd really been. Keisha leaned back against her pillow, staring at the ceiling of her small room. She'd found the crack in Victoria's armor. Now she just needed to figure out what was hidden inside it. And she knew exactly where to start looking, not forward in Victoria's fabricated aristocratic present, but backward into whoever she'd been before she became Mrs. Dae-Young Choi. The real question was, who had Victoria Sterling been before she'd learned to be cruel? Keisha downloaded Victoria's engagement photo from the Town and Country announcement and ran it through reverse image search at 2 in the morning, her laptop screen the only light in her small room. The first page of results showed exactly what she expected, the same society page mentions, the same carefully curated digital presence. But on the third page, buried beneath the polished results, was a cached page from a website that no longer existed. She clicked through, her heart rate accelerating. The page loaded slowly, a relic from 2018, Steeltown Models and Promotions, Pittsburgh's premier talent agency. The design was cheap, the photos grainy, but there in the third row of headshots was a face Keisha recognized instantly. Victoria. Younger, maybe 24 or 25. The bone structure was identical, but everything else was different. Harder makeup. Cheaper styling. Hair teased higher. An edge to her expression that suggested hunger rather than aristocratic refinement. And beneath the photo, a name, Vicky Kowalski. Available for promotional work, trade shows, special events. Vicky Kowalski. Keisha sat back, that familiar investigative thrill flooding her system. She typed the name into YouTube, filtering by upload date, narrowing the parameters to before 2019. The third result made her breath catch, Miss Steel City Dreams 2017, full pageant. The video had 247 views. Keisha pressed play. The production quality was amateur, a small-town beauty pageant held in what looked like a high school auditorium. The contestants wore evening gowns that ranged from elegant to desperate. And there, competing in the interview portion, was Victoria Sterling. Except she wasn't Victoria Sterling yet. She was Vicky Kowalski, and she was trying so hard it was almost painful to watch. Miss Kowalski, the judge asked, tell us about your background and what inspires you. Vicky's smile was bright, practiced, but her voice was completely different. The accent was harder, flatter, with those distinct Pittsburgh inflections that her current polished speech concealed so carefully. Well, I grew up in a working-class family here in Pittsburgh, Vicky said, and Keisha heard genuine pride mixed with defensiveness. My dad worked at the mill for 30 years before it closed. He taught me that you gotta fight for what you want in this life, that nobody's gonna hand you nothing. I'm competing tonight because I want to show that girls like me, girls from neighborhoods like mine, we can be anything. We can be elegant. We can be refined. We deserve to be seen as more than just where we come from. The desperation in those words was visceral. The need to be seen as something other, something better, something more. Keisha recognized it because she'd heard it 1,000 times in her HR investigations, the voice of someone who'd internalized the message that who they were wasn't good enough. The video continued. Vicky didn't win. She placed third. The camera caught her face when the winner was announced, a flash of such raw, bitter disappointment that it was almost uncomfortable to witness. Keisha scrolled down to the comments section. Most were generic, posted years ago. But one, posted just 2 years ago, made her screenshot immediately. Vicky Kowalski thought she was too good for the rest of us even back then. Looking down on everyone from the neighborhood. Guess she finally found someone rich enough to get her out. Good riddance. Keisha replayed the interview portion 3 more times, studying the woman who would become Victoria Sterling. The accent. The desperation. The poorly concealed shame about her working-class origins mixed with defiant pride. The hunger to be someone else, somewhere else, anything else. This was the secret. This was what Victoria had buried under layers of aristocratic performance and sadistic cruelty. She wasn't running from tragedy or trauma, she was running from ordinariness. From being Vicky Kowalski, mill worker's daughter, failed beauty queen, girl from a neighborhood she'd spent her whole life trying to escape. And now Keisha understood why Victoria targeted the household staff with such vicious precision. Every maid, every housekeeper, every working-class person in that penthouse was a mirror reflecting back the thing Victoria feared most, the girl she used to be. The court records from Allegheny County, Pennsylvania were public information, accessible through a database Keisha had used hundreds of times in her HR investigations. She typed in Kowalski, Victoria, and filtered by date range, 2017 to 2019. The result appeared at 3:40 in the morning. Kowalski, Victoria, petitioner, V. Marchetti, James, Jimmy, defendant. Dissolution of marriage. Filed March 2018. Keisha clicked through to the full docket. The divorce had been finalized quickly, suspiciously quickly for contested proceedings. She cross-referenced the defendant's name. James, Jimmy, Marchetti had his own extensive record. Arrested in 2019 for wire fraud and identity theft. The charges detailed an elaborate credit card scam targeting elderly victims across 3 states. Keisha found a Pittsburgh Post-Gazette article from that year with the headline, "Local man sentenced to 8 years for elder fraud scheme." The article was thorough. Jimmy Marchetti, 34, had been running scams since his early 20s. Small cons at first, then increasingly ambitious operations. The article mentioned that his ex-wife had cooperated with prosecutors, providing testimony that helped secure his conviction. His ex-wife, Victoria Kowalski. Keisha kept digging, following the thread backward. Another article from the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review, smaller, from early 2018, 2 arrested in bad check scheme. The piece was brief, describing how Victoria Kowalski, 25, and James Marchetti, 33, had been arrested for writing fraudulent checks to multiple businesses. But charges against Victoria were later dropped after she agreed to cooperate with a larger investigation into Marchetti's activities. And there, embedded in the article, barely noticeable unless you were specifically looking for it, was a thumbnail image. Keisha clicked to enlarge it. A mugshot. Allegheny County Sheriff's Office. Victoria Kowalski. The date stamp read February 2018. It was unmistakably her. Younger, harder, makeup smeared, hair disheveled. The expression on her face wasn't the cold aristocratic disdain Keisha knew. It was raw fear mixed with humiliation, the look of someone whose carefully constructed life had just collapsed completely. Keisha leaned back, the full picture finally assembled. Victoria Sterling didn't exist. She was a complete fabrication, a persona built from scratch by a desperate woman trying to escape not just her past but her entire identity. Vicky Kowalski, daughter of a Pittsburgh mill worker. Failed beauty queen who'd placed 3rd in a regional pageant. Woman who'd married a con artist, maybe out of love, maybe because she thought he was her ticket out, probably some combination of both. Arrested alongside him when his schemes finally caught up. Made a deal, testified against him, watched him go to prison while she walked free. And then she'd done what desperate people do when their old life becomes unbearable, she'd invented a new one. She'd become Victoria Sterling, Boston socialite, daughter of the conveniently dead Reginald Sterling. She'd erased every trace of Vicky Kowalski, the accent, the origins, the arrest record she'd probably hoped was buried too deep for anyone to find. She'd taught herself to move differently, speak differently, be different. And somehow, she'd convinced Dae-Young Choi that her aristocratic performance was reality. But the past had weight. You could bury it, disguise it, run from it, but it never truly disappeared. And Vicky's past had manifested as Victoria's cruelty. Every time she looked at the household staff, the maids, the housekeepers, the working-class people just trying to survive. She saw a reflection of who she'd been. And she destroyed them for it. Systematically, sadistically, with that satisfied smile that wasn't about power at all. It was about fear. The terror that someone would look at her and see Vicky Kowalski instead of Victoria Sterling. That someone would speak the truth she'd spent 3 years running from. Keisha had found the crack in Victoria's armor. And behind it wasn't strength or confidence or aristocratic breeding. Behind it was a frightened girl from Pittsburgh who traded a con artist husband for a crime boss husband and convinced herself that made her royalty. Now Keisha just had to decide what to do with that information. The summons came during the lunch hour when the penthouse was usually empty, the other staff on their breaks. Rosa's text was brief: "Mrs. Sterling wants you in the study. Now. Be careful." Keisha walked through the silent penthouse, her phone in her pocket containing screenshots of everything: the pageant video, the court records, the mugshot. Insurance, in case this went wrong. In case Victoria's threats weren't empty. The study door was open. Victoria sat behind the mahogany desk in a white suit so sharp it looked like armor, her posture perfect, her expression coldly composed. She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit." Keisha sat, keeping her hands relaxed in her lap, her breathing steady. She'd been in hostile confrontations before, executives who'd screamed, managers who'd threatened lawsuits, HR directors who'd tried to intimidate her into silence. This was just another version of the same dance. "I've been patient with you, Miss Robinson," Victoria began, her voice carrying that aristocratic precision. "More patient than I should have been. But I've noticed something recently. A certain composure. A lack of appropriate fear. And I think we need to clarify the situation you're in." She stood, walking to the window, her back to Keisha. The white suit caught the afternoon light. "My husband is a very powerful man. A very dangerous man. People who disrespect him tend to disappear. Permanently." Victoria turned, and her smile was venomous. "Now imagine what happens to someone who disrespects me. His wife. The woman he's chosen to share his life and his empire." Keisha said nothing, just watched Victoria perform her threat like it was a rehearsed monologue. "I can make sure you never work again. Not just in Chicago, anywhere. I can destroy your reputation, your future, possibly your life. Do you understand the kind of power you're dealing with?" Victoria leaned forward, hands on the desk. "What do you think my husband will do to someone who disrespects me?" Keisha met her eyes calmly. "I think he'll probably wonder why Vicky Kowalski from Pittsburgh thinks she can give orders in his name." The effect was immediate and devastating. Victoria's face drained of color so quickly she looked like she might faint. Her hands, pressed against the desk, began to tremble. "What did you just say?" The words came out barely above a whisper. "Kowalski," Keisha repeated, letting the name hang in the air like a verdict. "That's your real name, isn't it? Not Sterling. Kowalski. Vicky Kowalski, born and raised in Pittsburgh. Daughter of a mill worker. Competed in Miss Steel City Dreams in 2017, placed third. Married James Marchetti in 2018. Got arrested with him for writing bad checks. Cut a deal, testified against him, watched him go to prison while you reinvented yourself as Boston aristocracy." Victoria's carefully constructed composure was shattering in real time. Her hands shook. Her breathing became ragged. And when she spoke, her accent slipped, just slightly, but enough. The flat Pittsburgh vowels bleeding through the polished diction. You can't." "I can," Keisha said quietly. "I have court records. Newspaper articles. A mugshot from the Allegheny County Sheriff's Office. I have video of you at that pageant, talking about your working-class family, your father at the mill. I have everything, Victoria. Or should I say Vicky?" "No." Victoria's voice cracked. "No, you don't understand. That person, she doesn't exist anymore. I'm not her." "I'm not, you are exactly her," Keisha interrupted. "You're just wearing a more expensive costume. And you've been torturing people just trying to survive, just like you were trying to survive, because they remind you of what you're running from. The door to the adjacent office opened, and Dae-young stepped through. Victoria spun toward him, her face a mixture of hope and terror. Dae-young, she's lying, she's... I've been listening to the entire conversation, Dae-young said, his voice cold and flat. He looked at Victoria with an expression that made Keisha's earlier observation crystallize, weary disappointment. And I've known about Vicky Kowalski for 6 months. Did you really think I don't investigate everyone close to me? That I'd marry someone without knowing exactly who they were? Victoria swayed slightly, gripping the desk for support. I married you because I thought you understood reinvention, Dae-young continued. I came from nothing in Seoul. Absolutely nothing. I built everything you see from desperation and intelligence and ruthlessness when necessary. I thought you'd done the same. I thought you understood what it meant to survive, to transform yourself, to become something more. His voice hardened. But instead of learning compassion from your struggles, you learned cruelty. You torture people who remind you of where you came from. You've turned this home into a place of fear because you're afraid. And I won't have it anymore. Dae-young, please. Victoria's voice was breaking, the polished accent completely gone now, pure Pittsburgh desperation bleeding through. Get out of my home, he said simply. Pack what you need. My attorney will contact you about the divorce. Victoria turned to Keisha, her face twisted with rage and desperation. You've ruined everything. Everything I built. You ruined it yourself, Keisha said, standing. But I'll give you terms. You leave quietly. You don't contact anyone on this staff ever again. You don't try to salvage your reputation by attacking anyone else. You just disappear. The way you wanted Vicky Kowalski to disappear. And if I don't? Then every detail of your past becomes public. Every pageant video, every court record, every mugshot. I'll make sure everyone in your social circle knows exactly who Victoria Sterling really is. Your choice. Victoria stared at her for a long moment, and Keisha saw the exact instant when the fight drained out of her. When Vicky Kowalski, exhausted from 3 years of pretending, finally gave up. Fine, she whispered. I'll go. Victoria left the penthouse exactly 30 minutes later, wheeling a single designer suitcase, her white suit somehow looking less like armor and more like a costume she was finally taking off.